welcome to this week's Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura. I'm joined by James, and we have the return of Alan. Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. It's a long road back to match fitness at my age, but we're getting there.
Yeah, we'll maybe give you a few minutes today and see how you got on, and then see if you're fit.
I might be, having my hand up for a sub. Sort of,
giving it one of those.
Yeah, I'll be that 10 minutes into the second half.
Yeah, well, we've got plenty to discuss because, as far as I'm aware, this is as much as my statistical contribution is going to be today. I think since the last time the three of us were on a podcast together, Celtic have scored 10 goals. So there you go. Three consecutive matches where we've scored 5 goals, obviously.
Yeah, and I think you asked that question, and it did lead me to one of my favourite, little run of Celtic games, which was, I believe, the last time Celtic scored 5 plus in 3 consecutive games was the 84-85 season, when we had a wealth of attacking talent, and actually the Celtic won 5-1 at Hearts. They then beat St Mirren 7-1 at home, and then Dundee 5-1 at home. But the equally remarkable thing about those games is a different player scored a hat-trick in each of the matches. You had Brian McClare from midfield away at Hearts. You had Frank McAvenny scoring his second hat-trick in against St Mirren, his old club, in games that Celtic scored 7. And then you had Mo Johnstone against Dundee. I mean, what a bloody set of attackers that is. I mean, what would you give for that in today's market? So that was the last. So that was the last time. That's 40 years then, for just under 40 years that Celtic since they scored. So that's remarkable. That is remarkable, and that was an amazing Celtic team in many ways in terms of the attacking talent, especially at that time. If you go back further, the one previous was the Lisbon Lions. Essentially, the season following their triumph in Lisbon, the '68 season. In '68, they did that, and then before that, there's actually quite a few instances, in the early days of football, the 1890s and what have you, when goals were a bit more easy to come by. But in terms of modern football, you're going back 40 years since we've seen this. And as I say, we'd love to have had that, a good indicator of how football's changed. I mean, we're now looking at Celtic. In the first 6 games, Celtic have had 12 different scorers in the league already. So that's just something you probably wouldn't have seen in the 80s, where you tended to work with a squad of about 20 players, or 18 even.
Yeah, James, Alan talks about a team he remembers. You'll obviously remember the last time Celtic had 6 consecutive clean sheets and 6 wins in their opening matches, because that was 118 years ago, apparently. So, yeah,
that seems like just yesterday.
No, we're breaking records all over the place, and it's really rather enjoyable. But James, we'll come to you first. The St Johnstone match, you and I discussed it obviously last week. Neither of us, I think, held out particular hope for St Johnstone putting up much of a fight. And for once in my life, anyway, I was proved exactly right. I mean, in terms of the response or the opposition that we got in that game, not much different to what we expected, was it?
No, and I think I owe Craig Levine an apology. I had a back and forth with someone who's a St. Johnstone fan, and again, this is one person's characterization, so qualifier there. But apparently, Levine is rumored to have kind of handed over the day-to-day prep and some of the tactics to Kirk, who's now the stand-in manager with Levine's departure. Because I was thinking, well, maybe this guy actually watched the Falkirk game and would have pivoted away from whatever Levine had been instituting. But that didn't seem to be the case, and much to our delight. So it was one of those games that fully justified the scoreline. I'd say actually kind of chance creation wasn't as high as it could have been. And I'll share one stat that kind of is symptomatic of how overwhelmingly dominant the game was. I went back and I looked at the 6-0 defeat, or the win over Dundee in early August under the first season in Ange Ball, when we were just taking on, and that's again, there was Edouard was playing, Christie was playing, this was that little tweener spot where we still had all of that talent, and they were running around pressing handsball. I mean, it was like crazy for those 2 or 3 games that we got to watch that iteration. And I think we had like around 5 XG, and we beat them 6-0. And StatsBomb has this one, they characterize different types of shots. And in that game, we had what they call 7 clear shots, which is basically when the person taking the shot doesn't have anybody in front of them other than the keeper or an open goal. To put this into perspective, like when we're fully firing, like we are so far this season, and under Ange's like peak Ange period, we're like under 3.5 average clear shots per game. So we had 7 in that game. Okay, so that's an outlier. Like that's a really big hammering, clobbering of a team that we're just overwhelming and probably isn't set up that well against us. On the weekend against St. Johnstone, we had 9. I haven't seen a number like that, right? Now, the crazy part about this is we also had 3 counterattacking shots. So, which again, when you think about this, normally when we're overwhelming a team and we just totally defeat them like this, they're bunkered, like the pressure's just killing them. It's like, we have 35 shots kind of game, and we just barrage them around their box. But that wasn't how this game played out. I mean, there was some of that, obviously, because they were overwhelmed. But they actually tried to press high at times and just got counterattacked and were left wide open at times. So it was just a total mess on their part. And we fully took advantage of it. Again, it was one of these intersections of us being dominant and hugely overwhelming them with talent, and them also being set up. Like, this is the most incoherent I've seen somebody set up, which is going to say something. And which makes it most delightful is that it was, a week after we watched the team actually set up in a way that gave us a little bit of a hassle, and they did almost nothing like what Falkirk did. So yeah, overwhelming. I could use that word 15 times and it wouldn't be enough as far as how much we dominated the game.
Yeah, Alan, it was interesting because I was discussing as I do on text message with my brother as we were both watching the game in separate places, and I think the thing that is standing out as a casual observer of, without looking into the details of the stats and things like that, one of the things that I am really impressed with so far this season is the clinical nature with which we are taking our chances. Now, I don't know whether, in your opinion, and with the stats that you have, whether that's down to the quality of the chances that we're creating, that we are then finding them slightly easier to take, or whether there's an extra element of ability and class there that we are able to take those chances to such a high degree. But yeah, like I say, encouraging to me. You don't score 5 or 6 goals in a match without being clinical with your chance taking.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you call what label you attribute what you've just described. Clinical is one word. It might be lucky, it might be poor defending, it might be poor goalkeeping, it could be probably in all likelihood a combination of all of those things. So I've got Celtic at just over 23 XG for the season, and we've scored 33. So that's a pretty hefty uplift, really. And actually, my XG from the game at the weekend was very similar to StatsBomb's, around about 2.7 to 0.5, whereas some of them, like Opta, was kind of crazy big in Celtic's favour. So you got to layer on that as well. So is it clinical? It's a good question. I mean, we saw some absolutely, just again, most importantly, just from a football aesthetics perspective, we saw some wonderful goals. And I know what fun. I mean, actually the goal that really killed the game, which was the second goal, which pretty much ends it as a contest, the Bernardo goal, from Schmeichel at the back all the way through to break the press, 10 or 11 passes, but then McGregor direct to Johnstone, direct to Kuhn, the one touch then from Kuhn to Kyogo, and then Bernardo, so casual, but it's just beautiful technique that you expect from a Portuguese under-21 star, I guess. Was just lovely to see. So there was some lovely goals, and obviously the the Maeda. I mean, there is nothing more beautiful in the world than a flying header that goes into the top corner. I mean, it's just the most perfect aesthetic goal. And obviously the goal that Ida scored at the end when McGowan and Valle combined to set him up was another thing of beauty. So, game state comes into it. You're not chasing chances. You're not chasing to create. You're not racking up shot after shot. You don't have to take the shot from 20, 25 yards. You can try audacious through balls, etc. All those things. And all of those things will have an impact on XG in some shape or form. And they're all important contexts if you want to really be specific about what the XG is. And I would caution you not to be. Just use it as a guide. Use it as a barometer. Use it as a piece of information which guides you in concert with other information to tell you about performance. Don't use it as an absolute. So maybe over multiple seasons when you're using it for betting purposes, and people have proven that that's effective. I'm with you, but in terms of certainly for one game, it's just kind of a guide. So listen, I just want to disagree slightly with James. I actually thought for 30 minutes in their 2-3-5 mid block, I thought they were decent. I thought they were very compact, exactly like Falkirk, mid-block. They weren't dropping too deep. They were keeping high. Celtic were struggling to get the midfielders on the ball, struggling to get the wingers on the ball in space, in good space. And we kept trying these incredibly difficult straight little chips over the top of the centre-backs, which wasn't the most ridiculous thing to do, given how there were three big lumps in the middle, and they were quite high up in relative terms. So I don't have a problem with that, but you need to use that sparingly. And we got a couple of chances, or not great chances from that. So after about half an hour, before we've scored the first goal, we've only generated just over half an XG, really. So I would say St Johnstone had done a nice job up to that point. And actually, when the goal was ludicrously, disallowed, when Carey threw himself at Trusty, so diving header into the guy, and Trusty got penalised. I mean, just only in Scotland do these things happen. And actually, at that point, I was thinking, God, this could be a right long old night. It really was. And then, of course, we scored, and they did collapse. But I think one of the reasons that they collapsed or all unravelled for them so badly was just that key, and it comes back to the management, really. So they lost their captain through injury shortly after that disallowed goal. Cameron, the left centre back, big, massive guy, and they took a long time to make the substitution, and then two, when they brought the sub on, who was a midfielder called Essel, I don't know what the change was, and it took me until about a few minutes into the second half to realise that he actually was slotting in as the right centre back, and they must have shifted everybody else along one. And so they moved all three defenders out from that one change. And we scored in the moments as they were adjusting to that. And I think that, and whether it's the manager's fault or the player's fault not following instructions, but I think that completely threw their concentration, their organisation out the window. But before that, I would make a case for saying they were pretty happy in their little mid-block. I think they were pretty happy watching Celtic trying to dink, precision balls over the top to Kyogo. I mean, one of them may have come off, but it's a hell of a pass to put one of those through. So yeah. But and then I think little moments, little details like that, I think do have a big impact on games. And of course, once it got away from them, it really did get away from them. And then coming back to your original point of are we being more clinical? We're being more clinical because we can be, as in we don't have to chase the goals, so we can score that glory goal, we can score from a diving header, because we can, we're not having to chase. We can almost score the perfect goal. We're not having to chase scrappy goals, overload at corners, and overload the box and pile people forward and all that. You don't have to do it. So that again, that tends to probably suppress the XG a little bit. But overall, we are massively performing it, and it'll be interesting to see whether that's just one of those things, and it might be just one of those things because the domestic opposition have not been that strong, and it'll just kind of dampen down as the season goes on. Or that's probably the most likely outcome, I would say.
Yeah, just to pick up on a point you made about Maeda, everybody knows I have a entirely one-sided but very volatile relationship with Daizen Maeda. But I have learned to change my attitude as far as he's concerned, because, you know, the diving header was so exciting, the volley was so exciting. I think Daizen's got as much of an idea of where the ball's going to go as we have when he goes to hit it. And instead of looking through my fingers at it, I now open my arms and accept whatever may be. But he is an absolute machine of a player, and somebody who has rightly received an awful lot of plaudits. There are suggestions that he is running to Dortmund rather than catching a plane for Tuesday, but we'll see.
He's already there.
Yeah.
Listen, Laura, on Maeda, I think you have got this wrong, and I think you're going to cause yourself anguish if you carry on down this road. Because with Maeda, he's not going to change. He's not going to change. So you getting frustrated.
I've fully accepted that. I think
you've got to make your peace with what Maeda is and what he isn't. You have to make your peace with him. So I'm okay now with Maeda. I accept he's not going to do a two-step over as a nutmeg, beat a winger and float a beautiful pass into the back post for someone to hit. It's never going to happen, right? But it might happen once, and it'll be beautiful, right? He's you know, I know that he's 9 times out of 10 he's going to get the ball and look a bit, what do I do now, and just pass it backwards, right? But you've got all these other things that he does that are, you know, not necessarily the glamorous sides of football, which he does arguably at a world-class level.
Yes.
At a world-class level. And we're lucky to have him in that regard. So I've made my peace with that. I'm more kind of, I have less, because you know that whatever Maeda's doing, whatever he can and can't do, if he could learn to take a man on and he could learn how to control the football, he would, because he's that dedicated, he's that committed.
And he would probably be playing for Real Madrid.
He's that brilliant at football in terms of his attitude and all of those things that he would, but he can't and he won't, right? It's more, I get more frustrated with the likes of, you know, the Palmas or even the Hitatis, where their weaknesses are kind of the softer things, the attitudinal things. They've got the skills. They seem to be selective about when they apply them. That is frustrating. That is really frustrating, because you think you've got it. You've absolutely got it. Why can't we see it on a consistent basis? Why is it, you turn it on if you fancy it type of thing? And I think Rodgers is building a squad and a team that's going to have more people like Maeda, more people like Engels, who just looks like a down-to-earth laddie who gets on the pitch, rolls his sleeves up and does whatever he has to do and doesn't complain either way. You know what I mean? He just wants more people like that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, I'll take a leaf out of one of my favourite Disney films, Frozen, and I'll just try and let it go as far as Daizen's concerned. But I'm learning slowly to love him and all his flaws.
You must.
James, before we go on to talk about the Champions League, Alan touched on it a little bit, and just to close out on the St Johnstone chat, you know, just loving the aesthetics of some of those goals. The Bernardo goal was beautiful. The Ida goal was beautiful. The Maeda goal would have been beautiful, the volley, if it hadn't been chopped off. One of the kind of endorsements, if you want to put it that way, is I saw non-Celtic accounts sharing video footage of these goals and saying, you know, look at what Celtic are doing in Scotland while we're all not paying attention, sort of thing. It really is fantastic, isn't it, to see us coming together and see us really getting exactly out of what Rodgers wanted, getting exactly what he wants to put on the pitch, because it really is, when it's going well, it really is liquid football.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately, you know, we're a niche area of trying to offer a little bit of entertainment to people, but I mean, this is what it's really all about, is when you get these kind of games where you have a clustering of these kind of plays. I mean, it's just, you know, these are the kind of games that people can remember for a period of time, just because of how amazing the goals were. You know, the multiple kind of goal of the season type of candidates that you could reasonably make arguments for. Yeah. So actually, you know, when you're in the heat of the moment of them, it's like, oh, this should happen every week. And that's just not the practical reality. You know, you could be playing liquid football and not have another game the whole season where you get these kind of finishes all in one game. We'll be happy to see him regularly would be good, let alone 3, 4, or 5 of them in a single game, even if they're chopped off, so to speak. So yeah, it's that's what it's all about, and that's those are the fun ones. Those are the laughers, as we Americans call them. I don't know what you guys call them, but we call them laughers.
I don't know. There's probably some super Glaswegian word for it, but I'm not sure, Alan, if you can.
I can't, but that just sounds like a typical American kind of. No imagination has gone into that. It doesn't tell me. It doesn't tell me anything about what it is that you're talking about, and it's not even going to be funny when you do. Right? Why did you? What the hell?
I don't even know where it's. I don't know what the origin is. It's just called a laugher. I don't know.
Yeah. Well. There you go. I mean, listen.
It used to be an old-fashioned shellacking. Let's go with shellacking.
Shellacking. After a stramash in front of goal or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it's just thoroughly enjoyable, and when you're watching that kind of thing, it makes all the years and years of following the team through the ups and downs makes it worth it, and I think it's thoroughly enjoyable. So bearing that in mind, we'll go on to what might not be as enjoyable a process tomorrow night. But before we do, James, you just wanted to share a little bit more with the listeners and viewers about what the Huddle Breakdown's trying to do in terms of offering content and where they can find that.
Yeah, well, I'll make this quick. Alan was kind enough to delegate this to me this week, so thank you, Alan, using your excuse of recovery. But yeah, so yeah, exactly. Yes, you are. So we basically, we basically. With the lack or dearth of a show on Thursday, we've been trying to get our act together with the Substack that we've talked about and kind of consolidating the platform of content that Alan and I write, and then also with what we're doing here with the podcast. So we kind of unsheathed that late Wednesday, I think it was, into Thursday. And so that's kind of open for people to sign up for. There's plenty of information on the site, on the Substack, as far as what we're doing. So I won't belabor that point. Signing up is free. At this point, we're going to have multiple tiers, but right now everything's free, at least for the next few weeks, until we get our act together. There will be a subscription model that we're going to implement for kind of the premium stuff, the super nerd content that we're going to put into it over time. But yeah, it's basically just sign up for the email. The one distinction is when you're a free email subscriber, you'll get the podcast and the YouTube ad free. So that's kind of a nice little thing. We're trying to move more of our content, consolidate it, and get it out of things like Twitter and YouTube, where a lot of reasons to maybe do that, as far as like controlling ads and not really having control over your own content letting those companies have too much power over what you put out. So, so it's open. We're going to be sending out content regularly now. Alan's doing a weekly column, at least. I'm doing a weekly column. There's a chat feature now that's really cool that we're going to put some like shorter term stuff out for conversation for people that subscribe and have, as Alan's talked about in recent weeks, create more of a community. And that's ultimately what we're looking to do, is to get people that are interested in this nerdy stuff and, we'll have our own little section of the world where we can geek out on it and, hopefully not offend anyone.
Well, hopefully we will. I would just to labour the point as well, though, that this podcast, so this kind of weekly podcast that we do with Laura, will always be free to air if you so choose. If you want to support us, you can, and obviously we'd like you to, but it will be free to air for those that can or don't want to support it any other way. And also the weekly kind of summary of Yorkshire Whistler issues will also be free to air, which are arguably the two most kind of popular items, really. So we wanted to keep those free to air. And really, what isn't then is the deeper dive stuff. So the additional podcasts, the in-depth articles and so forth. That's for people that really want to get into it, and that obviously takes a lot more time and effort and so forth. So hopefully people understand that. We as I say, it's all free for now. So get yourself subscribed to Substack. Go onto Substack, the Huddle Breakdown. the full archive of my Celtic by Numbers stuff is there. It's over 600 articles. It's all there. James has been regularly posting a lot of stuff on there in the last couple of weeks. There's a lot of great stuff on there. All the podcasts are on there as well. So yeah, get at least initially get yourself subscribed to it, and then when the time comes where we put the sort of subscription service in, you can then make a choice as to which way you want to go. But as I say, this pod on the Yorkshire Whistle will continue to be free to air if you so choose.
Yeah, so for everybody praying and hoping that I in particular would disappear behind the paywall, it's bad news for you guys. I will be free to air at all times. But needless to say,
which I think is brilliant value for money, if I may say.
Well, yes, exactly. Brilliant value. Yeah, free is brilliant value indeed. Yes, but let's crack on with the Champions League chat. Anybody who's watching online or on YouTube, as we were talking about before, will see I am wearing a replica of the 96-97 Champions League final Dortmund shirt. Might be an odd choice given our opponents, but I have a confession to make, guys. Dortmund are, as much as any team can be, a little bit of a second team for me. It goes back a long, long way, but basically, James, you might not be familiar with this, but Alan will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you were fortunate enough to be brought up in Scotland and get to go on the odd Mediterranean holiday, you could get the fakest of fake football strips from the little stalls on the street and stuff like that when you were out after your dinner. And my first one ever was an Andreas Möller Borussia Dortmund kit from around that time period. So, and when we signed Paul Lambert, I was absolutely overjoyed, couldn't believe it. So, I always keep an eye out for their results, and I have been doing even more so recently. James, I'll come to you first because I watched Dortmund a couple of weeks ago play Heidenheim. I think they won 4-2, and they were terrifying. They were absolutely terrifying. As much as they gave up goals, they scored them with even more vigour. But the results have been up and down. Where do you sit in terms of Celtic's chances, given that, of course, it is an away game and it is a game relatively close in timescale to the game that we've just played with a relatively full-strength team? What do you think our chances are overall against Dortmund on Tuesday?
Well, just real quick, I'm going to say between Alan's mixed allegiance with Falkirk and now this Borussia Dortmund nonsense, I mean, this is starting to get out of hand. But
you've never been to a football match in your life, have you? Obviously.
Oh, I have. Watch it. How dare you? How dare you?
No wonder we get slagged off.
I was at a high school game last weekend. How dare you?
Which probably, to be honest, probably had more people at it than most Falkirk games, but there you go.
Oh, crikey.
Oh, geez. So I'll put it this way. I as the stat nerds the true stat nerds will understand, my central tendency is horrified. Okay. But I've got a very wide band of potential outcomes here. Right. So I think that a reasonable range of scenarios here is actually friendly to us. I mean, I think there's multiple ways in which this could be, a reasonable outcome for us. If you just watch them in the attacking form, you'd be like, oh God, what are we getting into here? Because of the speed, the talent, the skill level. But fortunately, they're kind of in a period of transition. In the reading I've done, and I have watched a couple of their games this season, including the one from Friday, and they're very much kind of in, they look like a team in transition. They look like they're not really sure what it is they're trying to do tactically. And in doing some research for today on their manager and kind of his time in Turkey, same kind of situation as I don't speak Turkish, and I've joked about this over the last few years on this show, so I won't even try to get into the linguistics of pronunciation. It's the T team, Antanala, not the Anala one, in Turkey that he managed. And the first season, they kind of had more of a counterattacking long ball style of play. I think it was a 21-22 season. And in 22-23, they mixed kind of migrated towards closer to what it looks like he's trying to do at Dortmund now. And as Alan's, he talked about before we went live, that's an interesting shift given that a team that was more counterattack focused just got to the Champions League final. So that they're making this switch, and this guy's not like obviously he's got a history with the club, but he's not the type of premium managerial name where you'd say, oh, well, let's shift what we're doing to hire this guy. So it's a really interesting dynamic as far as how they're kind of tweaking their style of play or seemingly trying to. And the net of that is it looks like they're a bit of a mess in transition, for example, particularly when they're playing a high line and pressing. Their pressing doesn't necessarily always seem to be all that well coordinated. So again, they look like a team that's chopping and changing, try to figure things out. And we've got, fortunately, the attacking players to really hurt them in transition. So I'm like my central tendency, I joked, I put out a tweet from the official Huddle Breakdown account saying when I was watching the Bochum game, I was like, I think we're going to win 7-6 on Tuesday, aren't we? And it's like, I don't think that. Like my central tendency is like maybe we lose 5-2 or something, or 6-2 or 6-3, something like that. But I could see it, a wild game, back and forth, wide open, chaotic, with no confidence in what that central tendency is. I mean, there's a lot of scenarios here that I think could play out. And a lot of it has to do with how does Rodgers decide to handle this? How conservative is he, defensive, versus what tactical tack does Dortmund's manager end up deciding to deploy, because he's been so kind of tinkering and chopping and changing. So I think it's going to be a fun game to watch. A lot of attacking, a lot of back and forth, and but that they're a tough team to try and hope to get the best of that against, because of how many super fast guys that are technically gifted, and the depth that they have in that regard as well.
Yeah, Alan, I want to dive in a little bit on some of the stuff that James has said, because you touched on it before we started the coverage. And the biggest problem you have preparing for a match is not exactly knowing what you're going to come up against. James talked about the way in which the manager likes to tinker. The games of Dortmund's that I've seen so far this season, that's not exclusively in relation to the lineup. That's represented in his tactics throughout the match, i.e., the three that they usually play across the front will switch positions throughout the 90 minutes. Players will switch positions throughout the park in the 90 minutes, and therefore it makes it very difficult from an opposition point of view to say, well, that's your man, you have to track this guy. You can't do that, because obviously then you would be dragged completely out of position. Looking at some of the ups and downs of Dortmund, since that 4-2 game against Heidenheim, they've played another 3 matches. They played Club Brugge and won 3-0. They were defeated 5-1 by Stuttgart, and then they won 4-2 against Bochum. So, I mean, that's 12 goals scored and 7 goals conceded. Much to James's point, it could be an absolute barn burner of a match. How do we go into this, and how do we set up, or how do we expect that they'll set up in a way that we can kind of try to predict what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, this is a game where I think we have to hope that the team dynamics of football, i.e. the extent to which Rodgers has crafted a side where everyone knows their role and is performing it with not metronomic precision, because he's actually introduced quite a lot of variability and unpredictability into the side, but it's all within what is quite a very coherent actually framework. And it's the extent to which a team that is clearly performing exceptionally well, that is operating in that way, comes up against another team that, as James says, absolutely is in transition and has exceptionally gifted individuals that we just cannot cope with. And in fact, in most cases, are the worst kind of opponents that our individual defenders would likely deal with. So I think that's going to be the dynamic. My overall sense of this, and I watched the Bochum game, it's not the only one that I've seen, and they were chaotic. They were absolutely chaotic, Dortmund. They were all over the place. as far some of the interesting trends throughout the game was that they went. It looks like Sahin last year. It was more of a 3-4-3. It was a counter-attacking team. He's kind of ditched that, and I think the last 5 or 6 games now they've been 4-2-3-1. So it looks like which is Sahin's default anyway. That's his preferred. So he's kind of tried. He's binned it, and he's gone with his 4-2-3-1. So, but where he can't seem to settle is he can't settle on his fullbacks, and he can't settle on his wide attackers. But where he does seem more settled is. He will have the two holders. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, for Celtic, is the two holders will be Emre Can and Pascal Gross. Now, they are two exceptionally talented technical footballers with a massive range of passing and, good, decent engines. They're both the wrong side of 30 now. Against Bochum, one of them would generally join the attack and one of them would kind of sit. But they're not what you'd call kind of box-to-box, like, Freddie Valverde type athletes. They're just not that sort of player. And then between them and the number 10, who's Julian Brandt, there was a massive gap, an enormous gap. And Brandt, the good news is he's not going to mark Callum McGregor. Right? We're not going to see that wheeze in this game, I can promise you that. Right? He's not going to mark anyone. Right? He just comes alive when he gets the ball. He's a classic number 10. Very talented individual. And he'll go all over the pitch to get on the ball. And when he does, his vision and his passing, his crossing, they banged in a lot of crosses. So their means of attacking then was generally to get the ball to their incredibly fast young wide forwards and just run at you, just absolutely go full speed at you. And then where they broke down was that they either wanted to take a shot or it just fizzled out. And so for a team that was sat under Sahin, they want to have possession. To James's point, I don't know what they were trying to do with that possession. And the only time it became coherent was when Brandt went wide and he was crossing balls into the box for Guirassy, who's an absolutely frightening centre forward.
He's horrifying too.
He's everything you wouldn't want Liam Scales to have bad dreams about. He's tall, fast, strong, athletic, skillful, everything, right? He's 28, right? He's not, and he's been around, but he just, he's one of these that if you built your team around him, he'd be terrifying. And he certainly, he kind of basically won the game for them against Bochum. They were 2-0 down. They should have been 3-0 down. And then they basically wore Bochum down. So there's a lot to unpack here. So let me try and structure this a little bit better. So on the ball, what struck me was the heavy reliance on individuality in the attacking areas. Now, the good news is that's a very tricky thing to do because it's not like Celtic are the opposite. Celtic try and break you down through patterns, movement, team play, and creating overloads and all that. Right? We saw it under Postecoglou. It's much the same under Rodgers. They will try and defeat you through just sheer one-to-one ability and through sheer pace. Now, the bad news for that is if an individual if it's not working, it can look awful, and you can just end up creating nothing. So that's kind of the good news. Bad news, the kind of bad news is that in Johnstone and Taylor we have two fullbacks who are not good on one-on-one duels with really fast guys. Unfortunately, Taylor's just simply not quick enough, and Johnstone does when he gets addled, he just does rash things. So that's going to be a real challenge. And so our wide, the Kuhn and Maeda have got a big job, I think, in supporting. But what is also true is that the wide guys and Brandt and the striker, and usually one of the two sitters were allowed to get on with it, and the rest had to defend. And the number of times that Bochum had 5v4, 4v4,
that's like a jailbreak.
5v5. It was incredible. I'm told the Bundesliga is a bit mental, and it was a bit mental, but this was just incredible. And if they play Celtic 4v4, 5v5 at the back, and we make good decisions, and I think with Engels and Bernardo, we could make some quite good decisions in terms of when to release the wide players, Kyogo through the middle, etc. And their two centre backs, they'll push right up to the halfway. They nearly conceded the third goal. Oh, they just rushed over the halfway line, and they just dinked the ball over the top to this lad to run through, and he missed. It was crazy defending, absolutely crazy defending. They conceded a goal trying to play out from the back and then being pressed, so that augurs well as well. So listen, there's a lot of encouragement there for Celtic. Mainly for me, it was just the fact that they often defended with 5 players. They don't get everybody back, but those players that they don't get back, they will hit them early. So as much as, and this was, I think this was the kind of conflict, if you like, the tension in their performance was that Dortmund team were used to hitting their players on the break high and early, and Sahin wants them to play a more possession-based game, and they were really struggling to reconcile those two things. And if they continue to have those growing pains as a unit, then that really is Celtic's best chance. But I think ultimately what happened against Bochum, who actually, by the way, were hilarious. I mean, they played 4-4-2, right? They played a diamond in midfield, and they had a basketball player up front and a guy that kind of ran off him. It was like classic SPFL stuff, and they absolutely log-jammed the centre of the pitch. There was literally no space to play in the centre of the pitch, which suited Dortmund fine because they had 2 sitters and they had Brandt and they had a massive gulf between them. And they had these 8 players, 6 players sat in the middle of the pitch, dominating it, but no one was really attacking them because Dortmund just sent the fullbacks up and down the wing and the wingers up and down the wing. So, but what ultimately happened was that Bochum ran out of gas. From 60 minutes, they just ran out of legs. And what Dortmund did is they brought on a range of attacking talent, young players.
It's just crazy.
Just with crazy speed and ability, and just blew them away in the last. So I feel this game, the way it looks to me, is that we're set up for the classic heroic defeat. I wouldn't be surprised if we go 2-0 up and we're 2-0 up after 60 minutes and then get absolutely blown away in the last sort of 30 minutes. I really wouldn't be surprised about that at all, because I don't think we've got the depth to counter. We need to go into that. We need to get to that 60-minute mark in the lead somehow, and then we need to probably solidify. Bochum failed to do that, and their individual talent that Dortmund had just kind of took over. In fact, there was a bit of bad news. They've got this kid, the English kid, Gittins. He's the only teenager, and he's been getting a lot of attention because he's English. The English press tend to hype. And he scored like 4 goals. Anyway, he played. He just ran up blind alleys for all the time he was on. And then I think he went off with what looked like a bad muscle injury, like a calf strain or something that probably means he won't play. So they brought on this Danish kid, Duranville. Oh my God.
He's even faster.
He's 18 and he's got a brain.
Yeah.
He was as fast and he played intelligently and he looked terrifying. So and Ademi is so quick. Giassi is just ridiculously direct, and Brandt kind of does the classic number 10 thing. And then Schan and Gross you've got sitting behind them, who are capable of pinging one in from 30 yards, playing glory passes over the top, finding people from all sorts of angles. But they're not particularly press resistant. They take a lot of liberties at the back. They play a very high line. There's always space in behind them, and they don't overcommit people to defence. So Celtic, I think, are going to find a lot of joy. We have to take our chances, and then we just have to hope for the best, because the risk will be that their bench, once they empty their bench, we just won't be able to live with that pace and youthful athleticism.
That worries me, because they could do. I touched on this exact point with James last week. Actually, they could do exactly to us what we did to Falkirk. We could be run ragged, and then they could bring 4 players on and completely change the match, which is what worries me. But James, I just wanted to pick up on one thing that Alan said about decision making from the midfield. I think we can assume safely that McGregor and Engels will start. The other midfield place that is up for grabs is between Hatate and Bernardo. There has been discourse online about who is going to take that spot, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Who takes that spot for you?
Well, I'd just like to point out that the winds have shifted towards Hatate's not good enough for the Champions League. Alan, did you see this mood shift on Twitter? I don't know.
Who dared to say that? That's heresy.
I know. All these people saying now that they prefer Bernardo over Hatate to start in the Champions League. It's
Weren't you
heretical.
guys getting lynched this time last year?
No. It was all a dream. So, I mean, this goes back to the interesting part of how Rodgers ends up. Like, I think that the relative strengths and weaknesses of both sides are so obvious that the managers have to decide, do you go all at those weaknesses and try to be front-footed and attacking the opposition and accept what that means relative to what are your weaknesses, right? So if Rodgers comes out like he did last season, where he was a little more safe and, as I talk about, kind of more compact and somewhat narrow, while still doing the counter pressing and pressing, but smart about it, controlled about it, kind of like Falkirk did against us. So basically we're taking a Falkirk type blueprint into Dortmund. That wouldn't surprise me. And if that's the case, you would probably argue towards Bernardo. But if he says, you know what, this team, he watched the Bochum game, he's watched all these games, obviously, and he says, we can go at these guys and they can crumble if we go at them, then I could see a reasonable case for Hatate. My concern is if we get a mismatch in that selection. So I haven't laid this out yet on the show, but I've kind of hinted at it. One of my main concerns about the mix in our midfield now, and particularly so now with Carter Vickers being out and Trusty, it looks like most likely going to be the right-sided center back, is our potential vulnerability being pressed with teams that are actually athletic and reasonably good at pressing. And I grant that we're not sure on that. We know they're athletic. We're not sure how good they are yet in pressing.
They weren't good against Bochum, but that doesn't mean say they might not be against us.
Right, exactly. So, the idea of Bernardo and Engels being the 2 8s against a high press with the mix of players that we have in the back five against their athleticism and size horrifies me. And I think we see that kind of hints of that. Engels and Bernardo, when they have their backs, when they're facing our goal and backs to the defense, that's a different thing. That's what we've talked about before, this connective tissue and buildup in transition. And that's been a weakness of Bernardo. I think it continues to be a weakness. My concern is that that's a relative, keyword there, relative weakness for Engels. And, at this level, when they're, this is the toxic combination concern. You have Maeda on the left. He's not going to be someone that's going to help control the ball and build up. We know that. And Greg Taylor can have a brain fart and spasm, particularly at this level with this kind of speed. We know Scales can do that. Trusty, everything I've looked at historically, he's not Beckenbauer on the ball. He can be okay, but he can also be not okay at times. So you put all that in, and I worry about if they do go front-footed against us, high press, it's going to be a big risk for them because we absolutely, I could just as easily see Engels play a 40-yard ball over the top to Kyogo and their keeper getting a red card coming out, pulling a Craig Gordon, right? So this is the kind of chaos that we could be seeing here. But we could also, I could see a scenario where they're up 3-0 after 15 minutes because they've just completely swarmed us and we haven't been able to get out basically. So that, I see so many different kinds of scenarios here, which makes it fascinating, but I don't have any confidence in how this is going to play out. Because I just think there's too many variables, too many reasonable paths that each team could take. And both teams are so obviously flawed in very important ways at this level. Obviously, that's skewed favorably towards Dortmund just because of their resources and talent level. But that's the nice part about all this is they are like we'll face teams like this. Atletico Madrid did not last season have glaring weaknesses where we could say, oh yeah, we can go in there, and we still got to draw at home against them, right? So on the night, you never know. But the good news is.
Sorry, James. That's a good point. We're not talking here about playing a Real Madrid or Atletico Madrid where you've got a combination of extremely talented footballers in a coherent system, and Celtic are going to go away from home in that situation, and I would say have got like a 1% chance. It's like a Barcelona 2016 or whatever. It's a Hail Mary. It literally is. Right. This isn't that. There is sufficient hope here in their transitional period that through the chaos that James talked about, that Celtic strengths can actually, can hurt them for a period at least.
But we need the finishing. You know what I mean? This is the kind of game. Like, we need Kyogo to finish these 1v1s.
Yeah.
Right? We need a Kuhn and a Maeda to be able to finish. And that's where I'd say, on the margin, the relative quality levels of the people finishing, that's where, like, I wouldn't be surprised if they get a couple of 1v1s against Schmeichel in this game with the chaos. And, I think you'd be unrealistic to say that on balance that their finishers are, at a level that's above, particularly Maeda and Kuhn. I think Kyogo approaches that more reasonably, but as we see, I mean, Kyogo has off days and misses what people would characterize as sitters in 1v1. So, but yeah, my concern is that because we've been so dominant domestically so far, everything's been going so well. We slaughtered Bratislava, that people and this is what being a fan's all about. Everyone's like really front-footed and optimistic going into this, and it's not unreasonable. Like, to Alan's point, like, normally against a top team, a pot one that's like this talent level and coherent, you'd say 1% away. Maybe it's 15%. I'm probably being optimistic and saying 15% probability of winning the match. But it feels like the collective mood's got this as like maybe a 40% or 50%. And I'm like, whoa, tap the brakes a little bit here. Like, this is, we're going to Dortmund, and, they have an extra day's rest, and, there's a lot of, Carter Vickers isn't starting. I mean, like, just that alone should make most of us like horrified about this game. So I think we're a bit out over our skis as a support collectively, but that's, we should be. That's the fun part.
Yeah, I don't understand this overly emotional response to what Celtic do or don't do. That would never be me. That would never be me. Thank you very much, James and Alan, for joining me this week. We will know 48 hours time how it's all panned out, even though I don't think between the three of us we have any idea what's about to hit us tomorrow night. One thing's for certain, we will not miss it, and you'll hear from James and Alan afterwards about their thoughts on the game, and you'll hear from me next week. James, Alan, thank you very much for joining me. This has been the Huddle Breakdown. Don't forget to follow us and like us and rate us on all the platforms, and we will see you again next week.